On behalf of the OOIDA Foundation, we would like to welcome you to this session of OOIDA's Business Education Series of online training. This series is the most comprehensive series of business education that has been designed exclusively for the professional truck driver. There are a lot of drivers who are really good at driving a truck, but struggle to make a living in the industry. With these presentations, we're trying to help the drivers who excel at operating a truck understand how to be a successful business person. This education series is intended to help drivers navigate the business side of the trucking industry by providing an accessible and relevant introduction to the management principles of operating a successful trucking business. We would also like to congratulate the thousands of attendees who have taken part in this series. Your overwhelming response has helped to ensure that these programs will continue into the future. Hello, and welcome to this session of OOIDA's online education programming. My name's Tom Gann, and I'll be your host for this series, which covers the drug and alcohol regulation as it applies to professional truckers. This regulation is obviously too complex to cover in one session, so we've decided to break it down into 4 programs, each approximately 30 minutes in length. In Part 1 of this series, we cover who's responsible for what in the drug testing process. In Part 2, we talk about the different types of tests and the chain of custody. In Part 3, we identify the drugs that drivers are tested for, and we also discuss the ins and outs of alcohol testing. And in Part 4, we talk about how the test results are reported, we talk about the return to duty process, and we talk about the consequences that drivers may face if they try to get out of or try to cheat the testing process. For this program, Part 4, we have Rachel Aycock and Joe Boswell back to help us conclude this series on drug and alcohol testing. We're going to be talking about test results, refusals, and consequences. Rachel was one of my guests in Part 1 of this series, and Joe joined us for Part 2 of the series. So you probably remember that they're both with OOIDA's Drug Consortium, CMCI. In this program, we're going to be talking about what happens when the test results come back, whether the results are positive or negative. We're also going to talk about things that constitute a refusal. We're going to talk about what happens when you try to circumvent the testing process. That's a lot of ground to cover in 30 minutes, so let's get to it. Let's start off by talking about the test results, and let's talk about the good one, the negative result. And I know that sounds funny. Negative is good, but in this case it is. Let's just say I'm a driver. I went in, I took a random test. How do I get the results? What happens?
It's going to be reported by the MRO, the medical review officer, and the MRO is going to either report it directly to the motor carrier or to the consortium. If it's a negative result, then that needs to be kept for 1 year. Should there be a positive result, that would be kept for 5.
So the medical review officer is either going to notify the consortium or the DER, the designated employee representative.
Right. It depends. If it's, some companies are large enough that they run their own in-house random testing program. For smaller companies, you can just have a handful of trucks, owner-operators with one truck. They will join a consortium. In that case, the MRO would report to the consortium directly.
When they report that, is that in writing? They do it with a phone call? How do they do that?
It's got to be on paper. It's either reported on copy 2 of the chain of custody, or it can be a result letter. Just as long as all the information is on there, that's up to the MRO.
This hard copy goes in the driver's file.
Yes.
Does the driver get a copy of that letter?
That's up to that company, that motor carrier's drug and alcohol testing policy. Certainly a driver can request a copy of the result. A lot of companies, they put it into that driver's file, and life goes on. Like on a random, they take the test, they just keep going.
In those type cases, and this happens a lot, no news is good news.
Right.
You just keep driving until they tell you not to drive.
Right. If I was driving, I'd want a copy of it. So,
yeah, it's a good idea to have that copy. In one of our previous parts of this series, we talked about guys who the motor carrier they used to drive for either wouldn't or wasn't even around anymore
Right.
to give them a copy of that letter.
Right.
So
right.
they should be asking for it as it's happening.
I would ask for it as they go.
Now, Rachel, I know that's on the random test. So on a random test, you go take your test, you keep driving unless they tell you that you can't drive anymore.
Exactly, yeah.
But it's a little bit different for a pre-employment and return to duty test, isn't it?
Yes, the pre-employments and return to duty drug screens are the two that are required to have negative test results.
So when you go in to take those tests, you cannot drive until the MRO has returned a negative result.
Exactly, yep.
Whereas on the random test, you keep driving unless you hear otherwise.
Exactly.
Now, I know we're going to talk quite a bit more about the return to duty process and the follow-up test a little bit later on in this program, but let's talk just a minute about that pre-employment test. If I've got to go in and take this pre-employment test, how long will I be waiting for these results?
Typical reporting times between 3 to 5 business days. There's nothing in the book that says exactly when it's supposed to be reported out. The only thing it does say is the MRO must make haste. He's got to do it in a timely fashion.
Okay, and in this case, is it the same as with the random? They report to either the consortium or the motor carrier?
Exactly. Yep. The exact same format, the exact same 13 points that make a valid negative DOT drug screen.
Okay, let's talk about the flip side of this.
Okay.
Let's say that I've tested positive.
Okay.
Now, how do I get notified and what happens next?
Well, if it's a valid positive test, the MRO has done his or her due diligence, and it is a validated positive test. They're going to notify either the DER of the company or the third-party consortium as a positive. And that is the DER's responsibility to get a hold of that driver immediately and have them stop conducting safety-sensitive functions.
Okay, what's that mean? I go ahead and deliver the load and
No. If there's positive,
I come back to the terminal?
No, you park the truck. They got to get you out of the truck.
So you stop all operations immediately.
Immediately.
What about if I'm at the terminal? Can I still work on the dock? Can I do mechanic work?
Well, it can't be a safety-sensitive function. It's got to be a non-driving, don't be near the truck. If they want to put you in the office and do some non-driving duties, they can do that. But
chances are pretty slim, though.
pretty
aren't they?
slim. They probably already got their office workers lined up, yeah.
All right. How long do they keep these records?
A positive has to be kept for 5 years.
In the driver's file.
In the driver's file.
Let's say a positive result's been returned, and I know I haven't been taking any drugs.
Okay.
Is there anything I can do about it?
Well, when you provide a urine specimen, there's two samples, sample A and sample B. Sample B being the split specimen, and driver has up to 72 hours to request that the split specimen be tested. That split specimen then has to be sent to a separate laboratory. Can't be at the same lab where sample A was tested. It's got to go to a different laboratory location and be tested.
So I've received a positive result. I know it's not right. I have 72 hours to request that the B sample be tested.
Right.
And is it my job to send it to a different lab? Does the MRO do that? How's that? What happens?
The MRO would put in the order for the sample to be tested.
So all I need to do is notify the MRO that I want that second
That's correct.
sample test.
Yes.
All right. Now, in one of the other parts to this program, we talked a little bit about that chain of custody and how it's your responsibility to stand there and watch to make sure it's labeled and sealed and
Right,
sent off.
right.
So what's the odds that we're going to get a different result?
Not very good. 9 out of 10 times that result's going to come back the same because the only thing that's changed, if it's going to be a different laboratory to test it, it's the same urine. So it's likely to come out to have the same result. The only thing that a split specimen test is really showing is to validate the laboratory's results.
And if I know for a fact that I haven't been doing any drugs and it comes back positive and I send it off to another lab, there's a chance that it was a problem in the lab.
There could be. Most of the time there's not, but that's why they sent it to a different lab to take that question out.
I'm not taking drugs. I know I don't take drugs. How in the world am I getting a positive test?
There's a lot more ways, especially nowadays, than there was before. Being in a different state can do it sometimes. The environment in which you're in, really has a lot to do with your circumstances. Say you're at a party, you're in an enclosed area, somebody lights the joint. You may not inhale, you may not partake.
You may not even know they're
You
smoking.
may not even know they're doing it. Some people don't know the smell of marijuana when it's around them even because that's not part of their lives. And even in that kind of circumstance, if you're standing in that room with those people, that comes into your system. You may not have purposely done it, but that will be in your system. A lot of times, too, people think, well, I've taken something over the counter medication. It's not illegal. I bought it over the counter. If you take anything over the counter out of the recommended dose, that can bump your concentration levels up and show a Schedule I drug of abuse. Because the Schedule I being only for recreational purpose, no medical purpose.
I've got a terrible cough, and it says take one capful every 2 hours, and this cough is really bad, so I take it maybe
3 or 4 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can bump you over that concentration level for an amphetamine.
And in one of our earlier parts in this program, I'd mentioned that it's the driver's responsibility to know what's getting inside their body.
Yes.
I also told the story about I was out in Colorado and we were at a family picnic type of event, and somebody brought brownies, and my sister-in-law, who's a nurse, and she has to watch it just like truck drivers. First thing out of her mouth was, hey, is there any pot in these brownies?
Exactly.
And it's legal to do there, but it's not legal for her to take, and it wouldn't be legal for a truck driver.
Exactly. It's all about responsibility for yourself. You've got to take responsibility in those kinds of situations and ask maybe uncomfortable questions or leave a party that you may not want to because, which is more important, that weekend warrior party or your livelihood?
All right. So even though I know I don't do drugs, I failed this test. Whether I've been doing drugs or not, I failed the test. It comes back a positive result. They've told me I can't drive. Is that forever?
No, and it is not the end-all, be-all. There is light at the end of this tunnel, and you're not the only person to have gone through this. A well-worn path has come before you. Basically, you've got the positive, you've been removed from all your safety-sensitive functions. The logical way back into compliance is, like Joe had said, if you're going to challenge the test results, you request that split specimen. 9 times out of 10, it will come back with the same test results. In that case, you move forward. You seek your SAP counselor, your substance abuse professional, and you move forward in their process with it. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but the consequences for positives are far worse if you ignore them, if you don't take care of them, if you run non-compliant. You will get caught.
Okay, before we go on and start talking about that return to duty process, there's one other result that comes out the same as a positive, and that's refusals. And I think refusals happen a lot more often than anyone likes to admit, but refusals are a big part of this process.
Yes, and some guys get refusals that don't even think that they're refusing a test. One of them can be that motor carrier or that consortium that's pulled them for a random can't get a hold of them.
How do they get a hold of them? Do they send them a letter? Do they call them on the phone?
They can. It really depends on how their company policy is set up for notification. It can be verbally. It can be on documentation. It can be when he presents at the yard first thing in the morning. Hey, Joe, I'm here for work. Wanted to sign in or clock in. And they can notify him while he's standing there. So it's really important that these guys know how their company is handling the drug and alcohol testing.
Okay, let's say I'm an over-the-road driver, and I belong to CMCI. That's the one you're familiar with.
Yes, sir.
How do you get a hold of me?
If you are an owner-operator with no DER for your company...
Or you're your own DER.
Or you're your own DER, we notify you directly by phone. We make 3 to 4 attempts in order to reach you over the phone. If those 3 or 4 attempts go unabated, we will send out a final non-compliant warning letter. It's got a little bit of teeth to it, a little bit of bite on that letter, but we've gotten a lot of really good responses back. And sometimes it's an issue of, hey, I lost my phone that week, or hey, I was on vacation that week, or I've got a brand new phone number. We got to update our system. So sending out a quick kind of a shot over the bow to them really gets their attention and makes them notice, our company policy and the way we're going to handle your notifications.
So every company has to have their own policy. That's part of the deal.
Yes.
And in our case, the CMCI, they try to notify you by phone 3 times. If they can't get you on those 3 calls, then they send out a letter. If you don't respond to that letter, then it's considered a refusal, which is the same as a positive test result. You're going to get pulled out of the truck.
Correct. Yep, you will be considered not in compliance and no longer allowed to perform any safety-sensitive function.
Another refusal I hear an awful lot about is the guy shows up at the facility, but for whatever reason, he leaves.
Yeah, that's also considered a refusal to test. Leaving a facility for whatever reason without being excused by the collector can be considered a refusal to test.
And that's a key, the collector. We've heard the story. I believe we even told this story earlier in this program. But a guy pulled into the test facility. He went in. He left his dog out in the truck, and he was waiting to go in to be tested. And he told the lady behind the counter, "Hey, I want to go out and give my dog some water. Is that okay?" And she said, "Sure." And he went outside, and the collector came out, and he wasn't in the room.
Yeah. Yep. And bad for the lady who told him it was okay to go out. She should know her regulations and her protocol better than to say, yes, you can walk out. Because once you go into that facility, once you present and you sign in, you are at that testing event, and you cannot leave until you are excused.
Yeah, and guys just need to be aware. When you go to the doctor, sometimes you have to wait a while to actually get in and have the test.
Exactly. And some of these facilities are urgent care. It's not just for DOT drug screenings. They're urgent care facilities. They're emergency rooms. You have an accident and somebody comes in with life-threatening injuries, you are going to have to wait. And you will wait.
and again, that's the driver's responsibility to know and understand these.
Exactly.
Okay, what about once I get in that facility, Joe? They're going to tell me what to do, and what if I don't do what they...
Oh, I wouldn't go in with bad attitude. I'd be very cooperative. If you have loose outer clothing, you got a coat on, they can ask you to take that coat off. They're going to ask you to empty your pockets. There's lots of things they're going to have you do, and you need to cooperate with them. If you want to put your belongings in a locker and know that they're secured, that's fine. We talked about before, you don't have to give up your wallet, but you got to cooperate. And if you don't cooperate, refuse to take off your outer clothing, and don't submit to the test, that's a refusal.
I've actually heard stories about guys who didn't want to empty their pocket. They had something in the pocket that they didn't want anybody to see.
Yeah, then take them out of your pockets before you go for a drug or alcohol test,
Again, that's the driver's responsibility.
Exactly. And as a consortium, I know with CMCI, we always tell the drivers, go in with just your photo ID. Photo ID, full bladder, and just like Joe said, have a good attitude. Be ready to wait.
Full bladder, there's one other form of refusal, and that's not being able to supply enough sample.
Exactly. That could be considered a refuse as well. I know we've touched on it a few times, the 45 milliliters that are required for a DOT test to be taken. For whatever reason, if it does not meet the temperature mark or there is not enough of that specimen to be tested, they being the collectors, will request for another specimen from you.
And if I remember right, we said 3 hours?
Yes, you have 3 hours in order to drink 40 ounces of water to provide that 45 milliliters of urine.
Okay, now you mentioned the temperature range, and that brings up the old trying to get around this, trying to cheat the test.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, if you go in and you have somebody else's urine and somehow you've got it on your body somehow, tied to your leg, whatever you're going to do to try to provide somebody else's urine to pass the test. If one of the technicians figure out there's something going on,
And it could be the temperature's not right.
could be the temperature's not right, then they are going to have to do an observed test. And if if you don't cooperate with that and provide your own urine, and they'll make sure it's your urine because they have to watch it come out of your body and into the cup. That's still, if you don't do it, it's a refusal.
Yeah, and on the temperature range part, the temperature range is from 90 to 100 degrees, which is the actual temperature of human urine that would come out of your body. If it would be lower than that, then you've brought it in. If it's higher than that, then you're sick. Your urine won't be over 100 degrees without having a fever or you being in the hospital.
And we've also heard people who put stuff in their urine to try to mask the results, whether it's eye drops or whatever. Mm-hmm. If you get caught with a bottle of eye drops in your pocket,
that's considered to be...
after you've been told to empty your pockets, you better have empty pockets.
Right.
Exactly. That's considered altering a test and could be considered a refusal.
If I end up with a refusal for whatever reason, I don't show up on time, I leave early, whatever the case may be, it's a refusal. What happens then?
Refusal holds the same consequences as a positive, so you would have to cease all safety-sensitive functions and be referred to the SAP, or the substance abuse professional.
And that means if I drove my truck to the test results and something happens, it's a refusal, I better not drive that truck away.
Yeah. At that point, you've refused a test. It is the motor carrier's responsibility or a consortium like us to inform the driver of their refusal. But if you know that you've refused a test and you get out in the truck and you start driving again, you're running non-compliant. You're literally breaking the rules.
You're looking at a lot of liability too.
Yeah.
I mean, you're looking at getting fined by the DOT, which, the fines, per occurrence could be up to $10,000. You go out there and get in an accident and it's your fault and they realize you just refused a test or have a positive. Yeah, consequences
You're going to have a problem with your insurance company at that point.
You got big problems.
You can have lots of problems, yeah.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned the fact that once I've tested positive for whatever reason, that's not the end of the road. There's a chance I can get back into the driver's seat.
Exactly, like we were saying, it's not the end-all, be-all. There is a way out of this and back into compliance and good standings with the FMCSA.
Now, in reality, I'm going to be unemployed.
Most likely.
They might keep me on the roster, but they're certainly not going to keep me on the payroll.
Exactly. Ceasing all safety-sensitive functions includes in it, on it, or under it. You will have nothing more to do with that truck until you have gone through the proper process to get back in compliance.
Okay, let's talk about that process. Joe, what do I need to do? What's my very first step?
Well, first step is you're going to have to go see an SAP, a substance abuse professional.
As a counselor, Ed.
As a counselor.
How do I find that again? I know we talked about this earlier, but...
You can go online to SAP List, so SAPLIST.com. And you put in your local area code, zip code, and it'll bring up a list of SAPs in your area.
And they have to be DOT certified
Yes.
SAPs. You just can't go down to the high school counselor.
No. Yeah, they've got to understand the regs because they have to follow the regulations too.
Okay, once I get this counselor, what's this counselor going to do?
Well, they're going to call you in. You're going to be interviewed by the counselor, and it's important to be honest. And that counselor is going to refer you to some training, some educational materials. He or she's going to put you to task to get that done, and then you'll have to go back to the counselor for a follow-up evaluation, and hopefully at some point you will get to take a return-to-duty drug test.
Let's talk a minute about that counselor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you may not want to go to that counselor. You may not even like the counselor. Let's talk a little bit about your attitude and why it's so darn important.
Definitely. This counselor is in direct contact with the MRO, the medical review officer, and this SAP counselor is going to have the concentration levels of the drug you tested positive for. So if you sit in front of that SAP counselor and you tell him, oh, I only do this every weekend, or I've only done it once in my whole life, but you have a concentration
It must
level.
have been secondhand smoke.
Must have been. But you've got a concentration level just off the charts. He's going to know you're lying to him.
It's very important to cooperate with the counselor. If the counselor thinks that you're not being honest and think the whole thing's just a joke, just be aware that there's consequences for that, as in your return to duty process might take longer.
And he's the one that determines how many follow-up tests you're going to have to go for.
You don't mess with the SAPs, and you're not dishonest with DOT auditors either. I mean, there's a lot of consequences.
Or a police officer.
Or a police officer roadside, you bet.
Like Joe was saying with the follow-up drug tests, 6 within 1 year is the minimum. The maximum is an infinite number within 5 years. We've actually got a guy in our consortium who has to do a follow-up test every month for the next 5 years. And unfortunately, that's his financial responsibility to take care of as well. The company is not required to handle that.
Not required to handle the cost of follow-up tests.
Exactly.
And, that just points out why it's so important for you to get along with that SAP counselor.
Exactly.
Whether you like them or not, you better make them believe you like them.
Exactly, because they are going to know the truth. They are qualified and they are trained to find people who abuse drugs and alcohol and give them the best course of treatment in order to redact that.
Okay, before we get off the air here, let's go back just a minute. There are several types of results that you can get from a drug test. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's a lot of different types of tests, but there's a lot of different results that can come. One of them is a negative result, which is a good thing.
Yep.
You're going to keep driving and you're just going to keep going. If you get a negative result, it does not mean that you're not going to get tested for another 2 years. It might be you're still going to be in the random program. Mm-hmm. Now, a positive result is a totally different story. A positive result, you're out of the truck. You're not going to be doing any safety-sensitive functions.
Correct.
A refusal is the same as a positive result.
Correct.
Even if you get a positive result, there is a chance for you to get back in the truck. And, let's don't sugarcoat it. It's not going to be easy.
No.
You're going to have to go through counseling. You're going to have to be retested. You're going to have to find somebody. That's the hardest part. It's probably going to be finding somebody to work for after you've done this.
Exactly. And just like Joe was saying, the smaller companies might be your best choice. The larger companies have a whole plethora of people that are claiming for that job, and they're not going to mess with, one small-time fish. Sometimes it's part of their company policy, too. They have a zero-tolerance policy for their drug and alcohol testing. If you come back as a positive or a refusal, that's an immediate termination because you violated their company policy.
Also, trying to get around the test is sometimes worse than having a positive result.
Well, like I said before, when the DOT does catch up to you, and they will, the financial consequences are, it's tough. I mean, it's enough to put an owner-operator out of business.
The worst thing you can do is go ahead and drive after you've already failed.
Right,
exactly.
Right.
Okay, it looks like we're completely out of time. If you've got any questions or comments about this program, or if you'd like a certificate of completion for this program, just send us an email to businesseducation@ooida.com. And don't forget to tell us which program you're referring to. Also, please remember to give OOIDA's Drug Consortium, CMCI, the opportunity to earn your business the next time you're looking for a drug consortium. They can be reached on their direct line at 800-288-3784. You'll be glad you called. We hope you'll join us online again for additional programming in the OOIDA Business Education Series. This series has been designed to give serious business education to truck drivers who take their business seriously. And don't forget, OOIDA has been fighting for the rights of all truckers since 1973. You can join the fight by becoming a member of our organization. Give us a call at 800-444-5791.